It was a spring night, and the air was filled with the scent of wet earth after the rain. A gentle breeze carried a hint of moisture. I wore a slightly wrinkled dark suit as I stepped into a dimly lit bar. This bar was tucked away in a corner of the city, with a red lantern swaying at the entrance, exuding a sense of decay, much like the souls drowning in alcohol within. The bar was dark, filled with swirling smoke, and the air was thick with the pungent smell of tobacco and alcohol. I found a corner to sit in and ordered a glass of whiskey. Just as I was taking a sip, a flash of bright red caught my eye. It was a woman in a red dress, elegantly leaning against the bar, swirling a martini in her hand. Her red lips were slightly parted, and her gaze was as sharp as a leopard's, piercing right into one's soul. I was deeply captivated by her beauty, my heart racing a few beats faster. It wasn't love, but an uncontrollable primal desire. She was the kind of woman for whom men would willingly make mistakes. Just as I made up my mind to approach her, a tall, muscular man emerged from the shadows, his gaze also fixed on her. It seems I'm not the only one hunting tonight, I thought to myself, a smirk tugging at the corners of my mouth, a hint of disdain flashing across my face. The woman seemed to sense our gazes, and she winked at me before saying, "Since both of you are interested in me, why not have a duel?" A duel? I was slightly surprised, but quickly regained my composure. The man nodded silently. "Of course, not with swords," she smiled, her eyes glinting mischievously, "but a contest of drinking. The bartender here has a special skill. He can mix a drink called Drunk Satan, and it's said that no one has ever finished 3 glasses and walked out of here standing." The bartender was a chubby middle-aged man with a greasy smile. He brought over 3 glasses of a dark green liquid and gently placed them on the bar. The drink smelled like rotting herbs, with a hint of decay, making me wrinkle my nose. "After you," the man said coldly, his eyes challenging me. I smiled slightly and, without hesitation, picked up one of the glasses and downed it in one gulp. The liquid burned like fire down my throat, spreading through my body instantly. I felt as if a fire was raging in my stomach, but I forced myself to smile as I set down the glass. "Another," I said calmly. The next 2 glasses were like invitations from hell. With each one, the world seemed to twist before my eyes. The man's face gradually blurred, and his voice became distant and hollow. But I knew I couldn't fall. This was a battle of dignity. When I finished the 3rd glass, the man could no longer hold on and collapsed to the ground, swaying. Though I was unsteady, I still managed to stand. I smiled victoriously, put my arm around the girl's waist, and prepared to leave the bar. Just then, the bartender gave me a meaningful smile, as if mocking my arrogance. "You haven't won yet," the bartender said in a low voice, his tone as if from the depths of hell. I ignored him, supporting the girl as we headed for the door. But before we could take a few steps, the power of the alcohol suddenly hit me. The bar's ceiling seemed to start spinning, and the surroundings became a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. I felt as if my feet were floating in the air, and then my entire body was pulled towards the ceiling by an invisible force. The heavy fall nearly knocked me unconscious, my head spinning in confusion. When I forced my eyes open, I found I hadn't flown up but had crashed to the ground. My head throbbed as if hammered, and my legs hurt so badly I could hardly move them. "Call an ambulance," the bartender's voice echoed in my ears, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. The bar's lights grew more piercing, stabbing into my eyes like needles. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry to make a sound. The sound of ambulance sirens gradually became clear, and I was lifted onto a stretcher. The dim bar became flashing streetlights, and my vision began to blur as the world slowly faded away. Just before darkness consumed my consciousness, I caught a glimpse of the bartender standing at the bar's entrance, still wearing that enigmatic smile. When I woke up, I found myself in a pristine white hospital room, my head wrapped in thick bandages. The doctor told me that my leg was severely broken and that I would need to stay in bed for at least 3 months. Since the hospital was close to my parents' house, I had no choice but to move back in with them. My parents' house was not how I remembered it. The room that had once been a cluttered storage room had been converted into a bedroom. The walls were painted a soft blue, like sinking into an endless ocean. The room was sparsely furnished, with just a bed, a desk, and a wardrobe, making it feel empty and lonely. Outside the bedroom window, a few birds chirped crisply. I lay in bed, quietly listening, but the loneliness in my heart only grew. My wife and 6-year-old daughter had also moved in, and their arrival should have brought me warmth, but the reality was quite the opposite. My daughter seemed distant from me, often sitting alone in the corner playing with her doll, occasionally glancing at me with a look of estrangement. This left a bitter taste in my mouth, making those past days of indulgence seem utterly meaningless. In the first few days at home, strange noises often came from the second floor, like someone sawing wood. Every time the sound rang out, my head would throb violently as if an invisible hand were squeezing my brain. Though my parents insisted it was just mice gnawing at the wood, I knew deep down that it was the sound of a saw, the teeth scraping against the wood, sending shivers down my spine. The lamp in the bedroom was another thing that kept me awake at night. It hung in the center of the ceiling, a ring of small bulbs emitting a cold, pale light, like countless eyes staring at me. The lamp made my skin crawl. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel those eyes watching me, full of malicious intent. I tried to turn off the lamp, but the switch seemed to be broken. My parents tried several times, even turning off the main power, but the lamp stayed on, as if mocking us. This strange feeling kept me up all night, my eyes growing darker and my anxiety deepening. My parents remained silent on the matter, as if hiding something, but I didn't dare to ask. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly oppressive, as if something was watching me in the dark, with every little noise amplified. Despite this, there were still moments of warmth. As time went on, my daughter gradually became closer to me. She often brought her little medical kit and pretended to be a doctor, treating me. I played along, lying in bed as her patient, cooperating with her diagnosis. Her small face was always so serious and focused, as if she were really treating me. After each game, she would blink her big eyes and ask me, "Daddy, will you leave us again when you're better?" Her words were like a knife to my heart. Her eyes held a mix of unease and hope, as if she feared I would leave them again. In the past, I had always been lost in the pleasures of nightlife, neglecting my family, but now I realized how much I had missed. My wife, too, was so gentle. Every time she sat by my bedside, holding my hand and softly recalling our happy times together, my heart filled with regret. She was so kind and forgiving, and I couldn't understand why I had ever given up such a beautiful life. I silently vowed that once I recovered, I would cherish my family and never disappoint them again. As the days passed, my injuries slowly healed. Every morning, I would try to do some simple movements, bending my knees, lifting my ankles, feeling the gradual return of strength. Seeing my progress, my family seemed happy, their faces full of smiles, their words full of care. But strangely, behind their smiles, I always sensed a faint sadness, as if something was happening that I wasn't aware of. This unease made me more and more alert, but every time I tried to ask, they would lightly change the subject. That eerie lamp was still shining, its cold, pale light as merciless as death's gaze. But then one day, the light that had tormented me suddenly went out. At that moment, I felt an immense relief, as if all the fatigue and pain in my body had been swept away. I jumped out of bed and tried to stand, and to my surprise, I could stand steadily. The joy in my heart made me want to shout, and I couldn't wait to share the good news with my family. My daughter was still playing in the living room, holding her doll and lost in her own little world. I walked over, intending to quietly observe her before suddenly standing up to surprise her. How happy she would be! She would surely believe that her medicine had healed her daddy. When she came to treat me again, I lay in bed, eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. She, as usual, brought her little medical kit, pretended to feed me medicine, and told me it was a magical potion from a fairy. I smiled inwardly. It was just syrup from the dining table. When she softly said, "Daddy, you need to rest well," I suddenly jumped up, shouting, "Surprise!" expecting to see her excited face. However, the scene that followed was completely unexpected. My daughter burst into tears, the tears streaming down her face like broken beads, and she ran out of the room, into her mother's arms. My wife held her, her face filled with fear, as if I were a monster. My heart sank, overwhelmed by a sense of panic. I quickly followed, trying to explain, but my wife just held on to our daughter, looking at me with terror, as if she didn't recognize me. They ran upstairs to the second floor, and I suddenly remembered what my parents had once said. The second floor was old and in disrepair, not to be entered lightly. "Don't go up there. It's dangerous," I shouted, but my wife ignored me, continuing to pull our daughter towards the second floor. I couldn't let them get hurt, so I rushed after them. When I reached the second floor, I was stunned by what I saw. There was nothing up there, no furniture, nothing, and the walls were peeling. In the middle of the floor was a large crack. My wife and daughter stood at the edge of the crack, tears in their eyes. My wife cried, "You still want to leave us?" And my daughter pleaded, "Daddy, can't you stay with us?" At that moment, my heart felt as if it were being torn apart, and my vision blurred with tears. I cried out, telling them, "I won't leave you. I'll never leave you again." I tried to move closer to them, but each step felt impossibly hard, as if an invisible force was holding me back. Just as I was about to reach them, the floor began to shake violently, and the crack widened rapidly. I used all my strength to push them towards the stairs, but I fell into the darkness with the collapsing floor. When I woke up again, I found myself in a hospital bed, my parents sitting beside me. Their eyes were full of tears, and when they saw me awake, they said happily, "You're finally awake." My mind was in chaos, and I hurriedly asked, "What about my wife and daughter?" My parents exchanged confused looks, their faces full of bewilderment. My mother asked softly, "What are you talking about? There's no second floor at home." "And who are you talking about? You've always been single." Hearing this, it was like a thunderbolt struck me, and memories flooded back into my mind. I suddenly realized that those warm moments, those loving times, had been nothing more than a dream. And the leg injury I had believed in was actually a hallucination caused by a severe head injury. At that moment, the attending doctor came over. Seeing me awake, he smiled with relief. "Your condition was very serious. We had to perform multiple craniotomies. It's a miracle you survived." It was then that I understood. The sound of the saw was actually the sound of the surgical saw cutting through my skull. And that lamp that caused me so much pain was actually the surgical light in the operating room. I lay in bed, overcome with deep sorrow. The dream had been so real that I could no longer distinguish between reality and illusion. The wife and daughter in the dream, their images were so vivid, as if they were right before my eyes. And now I understood, I might never see them again. They were projections of my subconscious longing for family and love, and in the dream, I experienced a deep familial bond for the first time. I closed my eyes in pain, tears streaming down my face. My daughter's final cry in the dream haunted me, a helpless cry that I had been unable to respond to. If I could see them one more time, I would give up everything, even my life. As I write these words, I am still in tears. That dream was so real that I wonder if it was truly just a dream. I remember my wife and daughter clearly, remember the love I had for them, a love so strong it seemed engraved in my soul. I don't know when I will be able to see them again, but I know that the familial love I experienced in that dream will forever stay with me, becoming my deepest regret and remembrance.